Good morning. It is Monday, September 19th. I'm Jessica Lovell. Imagine being told you have a rare cancer, but that a newly FDA-approved treatment might be able to help.
Oh my gosh. To be picked to be the very first one. I am so grateful.
We'll break down exactly what Carvkti, CAR-T cell therapy is, and meet those who have received it and how they're doing today. This time last year, COVID was still the concern as kids headed back to the classrooms, but this year, it's something different. And giving an extra boost to children with cancer. That's all coming up now on the Morning Medical Update. Thank you so much for being here with us on Facebook, YouTube, and on Twitter. We are live inside the Dolph C. Simons Jr. Family Broadcast Studio. Healthy blood cells under attack by cancer. But a recently approved type of CAR-T cell therapy called Carvkti is helping patients with multiple myeloma. It's a treatment that uses your own immune system to fight cancer. Our guests today are Jodi Grimes. She is the first in the area to receive Carvkti treatment. Dr. Joseph McGurk, Division Director of Hematologic Malignancies and Cellular Therapeutics with the University of Kansas Cancer Center. And Dr. Al-Ola Abdallah, Multiple Myeloma Specialist in Hematology. Good morning to all of you. You all have big titles, and so that was a lot for me on this Monday morning.
Did very well.
Thank you so much. Good to see all of you. Glad you're with us. As always, we're glad you are with us, and we love getting your questions, so get them sent in. The links are there on your screen. You can also post them in the chat thread. The American Academy of Pediatrics shows that children ages 8 to 12 spend an average of 4 to 6 hours a day looking at or using screens, and that's not to mention school-related screen time. Joining us now to talk about that and more is health system pediatrician Dr. Stephen Lauer. Good morning to you.
Good morning.
All right, you're going to help us out today. Parents concerned with something they're calling the silent killer. Does it deserve that harsh distinction, Dr. Lauer? That's a pretty big one.
That might be a little harsh, I think, at this point, but certainly something for us to continue to be worried about as get our kids back to school and still walking around using their devices a lot, directs a lot of their social interactions in life, and there are some negative consequences to too much use.
Okay, so I know you ask your patients, your little patients and their parents, how much screen time you're getting. I know that because you've asked my kids. I'm not sure how much they're giving you the full story, but you at least ask. But how much is too much? How much can we get by with, but just how much is just way too over the top?
Well, I think there's the numbers question to that, and then there's just the kind of the overall point of when does it really start interfering with family interactions with a kid's life. But formally, there's studies that show as you get to more than 2 hours of screen time, that's non-educational screen time per day, that symptoms of anxiety and depression start going up. That's for both children and adults. And so something that we really want to try and keep those numbers under.
The American Academy of Pediatrics recommends children under 18 months of age to have no screen time at all. That makes sense. Children over 2 should be limited to 1 hour or less a day of high quality program. High quality, I'm just hopeful for some quality, Dr. Lauer. So how realistic is that? Is it best just to keep them away altogether or try to find some high quality type of screen time?
Well, I think it's going to be hard to say where your kids are just going to stay off screens in today's world. That seems very unlikely. Mm-hmm. But I do think that parents have to spend some time monitoring what their kids are watching, looking for those programs that are somewhat interactive and educational, and really monitoring what their kids are doing, especially on social media where a lot of these problems really do arise.
So within the last few days, switching gears on something here, the federal government tightened safety standards on those tiny, high-powered magnets, you know, that we've heard over years. I don't want you to tell me that eating magnets is bad. I think we know that. But just what message do you have to parents? I think parents have so much to look out for when it comes to kids. And how dangerous can this be? Just kind of help us through this and what we need to know.
Well, yeah, you're right. Magnets have never been a good thing to swallow. But the problem now is that many of these magnets are very much stronger than used to be. And they're sold as these stress-reduced toys, desktop things for parents to play with. The problem is if children, especially small children, swallow more than one of those, they're strong enough that they can actually loop together across different body parts. So especially in the small intestine, they can bring loops of bowel together, stick them together, and end up having having breakdown in the small intestine especially. So it's led to a big increase in the number of kids in EDs and having procedures and some surgeries sometimes to get these things out. So parents just have to be aware of these risks, watch out for those small things that their children can swallow.
Another thing to look out for.
Right, so.
All right, let's talk flu.
Yep.
Very important today. The American Academy of Pediatrics found that flu vaccines, they lagged last year, only 55% of kids getting their vaccine. How are we, or what are we as a whole doing to help change this year?
Well, I think last year, especially, things were so off schedule with the different COVID vaccines coming out and the appropriate attention to those. This year, hopefully back to a little bit more of the normal schedule with the flu vaccines for this year now available for kids, along with, depending on their age, some of the updated COVID vaccines. So hopefully it's just getting the messages back on schedule about the importance of flu vaccine, along with keeping them up to date on their COVID vaccines.
Well, then before I let you go, because I'm sure we'll get this question from our community, when should we be taking our kids to get their flu shots? Do we wait a little bit, or when we walk into Walgreens or CVS, should we just go ahead and get them out of the way?
We always say if you're there and you have a chance to get vaccinated, go ahead and do it. There's talk about, is it best to wait a little bit here or there? The worry is that if you pass up that opportunity, then all of a sudden it's January and February and your kid has the flu, and so is the rest of the family. So I'd say if you have that opportunity, go ahead and get your child vaccinated for flu and make sure their COVID vaccines are updated as well.
That's the same message we always say to whoever sits in that chair, which is never miss a chance to get vaccinated.
Right.
Dr. Lauer, thanks so much for joining us today. Have a great week.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Multiple myeloma is relatively uncommon. However, this year, about 34,000 new cases are expected to be diagnosed, with more than 12,000 dying from this rare cancer. Now, the latest FDA-approved CAR-T therapy called Carvkti will treat multiple myeloma. It is available, and we spoke with two of the very first here in our area to receive it.
My son is going to graduate next year from Pitt State, so I really want to be there for that, for sure.
And it looks like this active, involved mom will be. In 2008, Jodi Grimes was diagnosed with cancer, multiple myeloma.
What alerted me to go to the doctor is that I was so confused. I didn't know a lot of anything. I wanted to sleep all the time.
Jody went through chemo treatment and a bone marrow transplant.
That was probably one of the worst things ever, but it put me into remission for like about 18 months.
Then October of 2021.
It came back with a vengeance, and I had been going through different chemotherapies and none of them seemed to work.
Doctors at the University of Kansas Cancer Center suggested CAR-T therapy, a type of immunotherapy that extracts your own cells, regenerates them, and infuses them back into your body. Carvkti was FDA approved earlier this year. Jody was the first in the region to receive it here.
Oh my gosh, to be picked to be the very first one. I am so grateful.
I had pretty severe symptoms.
A tick bite while on a Boy Scout camping trip in 2017 sent 62-year-old David Franze to the emergency room.
Shortness of breath, hard time breathing, my kidneys had shut down.
That unlucky tick bite may have just helped save David's life. Doctors did blood test after blood test, which led to a multiple myeloma diagnosis.
At first, it was very scary because the stuff you could read online, survival rates and that kind of thing, didn't reflect the advances that had occurred since 2014, 2015.
Advances like CAR-T therapy and Carvkti.
It's a game changer.
We were with David while he was having his cells taken out.
We're going to pack it up and get it out of here today. Excellent.
Like Jody, David also had a bone marrow transplant and had been on several treatment paths. Recently, there were some setbacks. Doctors felt it was time for immunotherapy. And now he and Jody are helping pave the way for other multiple myeloma patients.
I'll say it this way, I'm much happier when I'm looking at this in the rearview mirror than I do right now, because the risk and the tribulations that are going to be there, for lack of a better term, it's going to be worth it to come out the other side with a positive outcome.
And Jody feels the same.
I have to be here for my husband, for my dog, and for my kids. So, yes, I have a lot of hope.
And hopeful Jody is joining us here this morning, looking great. How are you today?
I'm very good. Thank you.
Good to see you. Dr. Abdallah is your doctor, so nice to, how great is it to see her up and awake and doing well?
I'm very happy to see her right now, and she's doing really fine, and her counts has recovered, so that's really great, you know.
So Carvkti requires at least 3 prior treatments that have failed. So Jody, what was it like to learn that there was this new treatment out there that could specifically help you?
It was very exciting. I'd read a lot about it, and I was so excited to be the first one to be picked to do this and to know that you could go into remission for a long time.
It's really exciting, and I love that you were willing to be the first and kind of lead the charge. I think that's fantastic. There's some information on your screen about CAR T therapy, the bit.ly link /MMU CART. So check that out. Dr. McGurk, Carvkti treatment's the last option. Is that true for people who have no other options?
It certainly has been true for the majority of patients. Patients have been through at least 3 prior treatment regimens. Many of these patients have been through 5, 6, 7 different regimens and exhausted all of the standard drugs that are used for this, including stem cell transplantation. So for many patients, this is at the end of the line of therapies that are available.
Okay, so I have to ask that obvious question. Then why can't we just go straight to the top? Why can't we go straight to Carvkti and CAR T? Why so many other failed therapy treatments before we get to this one?
That's a great question. It's headed in that direction.
Okay.
And so first, when you have a new therapy like this quite remarkable therapy, you have to try it in the worst case scenario. The patients are enrolled in early phase trials to make sure it's going to be safe. And then after those studies are done, you start looking for effectiveness. And this has been a very effective therapy. 98%, just shy of 98% of patients having responses, about 83% complete remissions, really stunning, remarkable results that are unprecedented. When you see those kind of results, the next step is to take it up earlier in the disease process. And right now we have a study that we're getting ready to open at University of Kansas Cancer Center that enrolls patients in a trial that will either randomize them to a stem cell transplant or to CAR T therapy. Now you could ask about, well, that's really the second line, but stem cell transplant over the last couple of decades has become a frontline therapy. After initial chemotherapy, you don't wait for them to relapse, you take them to transplant. So we are indeed moving in that direction.
So stem cell, very successful.
Yes.
And so for folks who have never heard of CAR T, and if you're like me, I had not either until I came here. And it took me a while to finally really understand what's happening, but kind of break it down, kind of in layman's terms, exactly what's happening during CAR T treatment.
There are cells in our body that have the job of protecting us from infection called T cells. But many people don't realize that those same cells, the T cells, help prevent cancer development. And so they're fighting off abnormally behaving cells our whole life long, from fetal development all the way to advanced age. And so when patients develop cancer, T cells haven't done their job. So with this type of therapy, with CAR T cell therapy, we take the T cells out, we re-engineer them genetically in the laboratory so that they'll recognize the cancer again and do the job that they should have done in the first place. We expand them to billions of cells, and then, as was mentioned earlier, we infuse them back intravenously into the patient. They sweep around the body, they attach to the cancer cells, punch a hole in them, release molecules that race through and chop up the insides of the cells. It's really quite remarkable.
And this is the Pac-Man that
this
you always talk about.
You always say it's just like a Pac-Man gobbling up those cancer cells.
I said, that's what I understand, right?
Yes.
Okay. Dr. Abdallah, why is multiple myeloma so rare? It's rare when we talk about all the cancers, but it's actually the second most common blood cancer, correct?
Correct.
But still
That's
rare.
Yeah, but also just kind of like to also give a small clue for a lot of audience about multiple myeloma. It's a blood cancer that affects one of the white blood cells called plasma cells. We have the plasma cells supposed to protect us from infection, produce antibodies in order to protect us for any kind of common infection. But for some reason, which we're trying to advance ourselves and understand that, these plasma cells become cancerous, immature, produce more of these antibodies and become very harmful to the patient. It causes bone pain, bone fractures. It can cause kidney damages up to patients going to dialysis. And it can cause also patients to have a bone marrow failure with anemia and transfusion. So this is a deadly cancer if it's not treated. However, believing that although it's a rare cancer, we have a lot of advancement in technology to make the right diagnosis for these patients.
So I want to ask Jody, so tell us a little bit about when you were first diagnosed. What type of symptoms were you having, if any?
I would have really bad headaches. I would vomit a lot, and I wanted to sleep all the time. So I knew that there was something wrong. And when I say sleep all the time, I mean all the time.
So you knew to get checked out?
Yes, I knew something was wrong. So I went to my primary doctor. We talked about, blood pressure, things like that. And then she ran some tests. And right before Christmas, that's when she gave me the news.
Not good news. Is it hard to diagnose, though, Dr. Abdallah? Is it because it's rare, or?
Well, I mean, there are these symptoms, like, unfortunately, will be advanced, and most of the physicians are aware about that, so they can make the appropriate diagnosis. We have really advancement of diagnostic procedures or techniques that have actually evolved since 1970s, 80s, and now, so that we have a really great understanding how to make the appropriate diagnosis for these patients.
So, Dr. Abdallah, how long did it take for Jody to start seeing results from this treatment, and how did you present this option to her?
So first, it takes like about 4 weeks, for most of the patients to start seeing the first response. However, as Dr. McGurk and I, we know about there's a 98% success rate for the response. 60% of these patients go to what we call the deepest response, and that's really impressive in this stage of myeloma. And as me and Dr. McGurk, we always have the argument about, in this stage of myeloma treatment, the best treatments can give you a 30% response rate with maybe a 1 or 5% chance that it can go to a deeper response. She have a 60% chance that it can go to what we call stringent complete remission, absent of the disease itself. And it takes about 3 months to actually, which we're hoping for that and hoping to keep her in remission. The reason we offer it to her is that we always have this amount of quality of treatments. Like as Dr. McGurk talked about, stem cell transplant is one of them. Unfortunately, she progressed on it. She progressed on all other options of therapy that are very critical and important. So it comes to the point, like after multiple lines of therapy and multiple quality of treatments that we have this option of Carvkti cell that we believe that presenting it to her is going to be a life-saving in her condition.
All right, I want to check in with Dr. Dana Hawkinson and get our COVID count, and then we'll pick this up here in just a moment. Good morning to you. How are you?
Hi, good. Yeah, right now in the health system we have 36 active infections with 6 in the ICU and 2 of those on the ventilator. We still do have 17 in that recovery period, but overall, our infections continue to be fairly high. And we continue to understand, though, that nationally the cases as well as hospitalizations are going down.
So the new bivalent vaccine booster is out.
Yeah.
The health providers say that the demand is strong. Just comment on that. That's certainly good news to hear that people are out getting shots in arms. That's what you want.
Yeah, I think that's extremely important. I think we do know and understand, and if you look at the CDC's latest data, you still have a 5 times higher chance of going to the hospital if you are not up to date with your booster. And so as we're moving into the cooler season, we have to expect some sort of COVID surge along with influenza rates increasing as well. It's going to be the best thing to do to protect yourself individually, and by that it is going to be getting that updated booster.
Doc Hawk, ABC News reports hundreds of Americans still dying from COVID-19. Yeah. Why is that? Is this all unvaccinated related? Why the deaths? What do we attribute those to?
I mean, obviously it is multifactorial, but the greatest part of that is going to be the lack of being up to date with your booster. But of course, you also do include in there those comorbid conditions such as age, obesity, diabetes, heart disease, lung disease, things like that. But really the most impactful thing would be not being up to date with your booster. And again, I think it's also important to understand that if you are having some of those other conditions, even such as age or other medical conditions, if you do have symptoms, it is so vitally important to test early and get on Paxlovid to gain that further reduction in your chance of going to the hospital as well.
Doc Hawk, thanks so much. Yeah. Appreciate you. Any reporter questions on the line today? All right, let's get to our community. As always, Yen Liang wants to know, is the new treatment for multiple myeloma affordable, Dr. Abdallah? Carvkti, how is it paid for?
Well, I mean, we actually kind of like all go through the insurance. This is an FDA approval treatment, you know, so we go through the insurance. I know how much is expensive, but we have to really understand and go backward, you know, in this stage of myeloma treatment, and as Dr. McGurk know about all the options, not only they have a less response rate, most of the patients receive, you know, they have to come either weekly or every other week for getting treatment. They have to have labs checked. Unfortunately, most of these treatment can cause many side effects that they have to be hospitalized. So if you're talking about the cost effective, you know, the efficacy and the cost of the treatment of CAR T cell, it's actually really much better than all options of therapy that we actually see comparing to the CAR T cell.
Jody, Troy has a question for you. How long before you started feeling better after you started Carvkti?
Probably about 30 days when I started to feel really good.
Are you back to you again?
I am. I feel like I am back to myself again after a very long time.
So what are you looking forward to doing? Is there anything you've got on the agenda just now that you're feeling back to your old self?
Oh my gosh, just everything. I could do things around the house that I wasn't able to do before or didn't feel like doing anyway. Gosh, I feel so much better.
And has your son graduated? Did you make it to the graduation?
No, he has not. He will graduate next May. So
and you'll be ready
to be better for that. Yes.
Yes.
So ready for that.
I know you are, and that'll be a celebration for you too, Mom. It takes the mom to get him across that stage. So we're excited for you to be able to do all those things with your family that I know you've missed. Jeff wants to know, Jody, also, is there cancer or multiple myeloma in your family? Did you have any reason to believe that you would have a cancer diagnosis?
No idea. And when they told me it was multiple myeloma, I'd never heard of it before.
Like a lot of people. Yeah, Dr. Abdallah, that's something new. If somebody had not heard of that before, that means it may not be in their family. Is it hereditary?
We don't have really strong evidence about that. I think there's many studies that trying to actually see if it's any connection. We are still in the process of understanding it. Unlike other cancers like breast cancer, maybe colon cancer, we don't have that strong connection that if it's hereditary or not.
Dr. McGurk, Shirley is asking, is CAR T cell therapy only available in the U.S. or is it available overseas?
It is under review by the European agencies, and we expect it'll have global approval throughout the world because of the effectiveness. You know, one of the major challenges we have is that there's limited manufacturing capacity, and so that for a center like ours where we have 50 patients in need, we can only get 2 slots on a monthly basis. And so this is a critical issue. We have a highly effective therapy in patients in very, very trying circumstances, and yet for a significant percentage of patients, we cannot access the therapy for them yet in the United States. So we have a lot of work to do.
Speaking of access, did supply chain now or during COVID affect getting this type of therapy to patients?
Yes, supply chain has affected getting this therapy to patients, but in a somewhat unique way. It's not the big ships off the coast that can't get into the docks. We're doing all of this in our nation. But again, it's that manufacturing piece. The companies that make CAR T, and there's another. There are 2 CAR T approved for multiple myeloma in the United States, and we get a couple of slots from each of them on a monthly basis. They simply don't have the manufacturing facilities to make these complex therapies quickly enough to accommodate all of the patients in need. And so this is something that we're all standing on top of the building, we docs and patients around the nation, saying, come on, let's up the game, guys. This is highly effective.
Well, and you said complex therapy. So there's what you said 2 for multiple myeloma, and there's 5 other CAR T therapies.
Yes,
is that right?
correct.
So there's 7 total. How do you know which patients, based on the cancer and based on their bodies and how they might respond, how do you know which CAR T cell therapy to give to each patient?
That's a great question. There are some differences. The other indications are acute lymphoblastic leukemia in children and adults, when relapse is a disastrous problem, but highly effective CAR T therapy available. Different types of non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, mantle cell lymphoma, diffuse large cell lymphoma, follicular lymphoma, those patients are all eligible for FDA-approved constructs, as you mentioned earlier. And then choosing which construct, what do we use and how do we use it and for whom? For the most part, it's a practical issue. Which one can we get most quickly and access, and we'll take what we can get. If we have the option of a couple of different constructs, then we may choose one that has a lesser toxicity profile for an older population with comorbidities, in contrast to one that has more toxicities but also might be a bit more effective in younger fit patients. So these are areas of focus of our patient review meetings, which Dr. Abdallah and I both attend every week, a couple of times, where we stratify patients and who's going to get those precious few slots, and what constructs are we going to use.
A lot of strategizing.
Yes, very much so.
Shannon wants to know, can you use it for smoldering multiple myeloma?
That's an interesting question. We don't have any proof that smoldering myeloma is treatable. We are still undergoing a lot of investigation about the newer treatments, how to work. We have to be very careful for any treatments that we want to advance in patient who has smoldering myeloma. In the future, it might be actually used, but we are not recommending it right now for that.
All right. And question from Yen Liang. What are the common organs that multiple myeloma cells may spread to?
Commonly we know it's the bones are the common organ, kidneys, and the bone marrow failure. These are the three commonest that we actually see. However, again, advance of the technology, more awareness of our internal medicine, primary care physicians. Now we're actually making the diagnosis even prior to have what we call the end organ damage. So we're diagnosing these patients who are very high risk to develop myeloma.
A couple last questions. Any side effects that someone might receive from Carvkti?
Of course, I don't know, Dr. McGurk, I can talk about the CAR T cells that have the major three side effects. However, we have to understand that multiple myeloma in this stage is deadly, if you don't give the right treatment. And with the CAR T cell, the benefit of it outweighed the risk. The major side effect, as Dr. McGurk has talked about the mechanism of action of it, is that some of these cytokines will cause off the target some symptoms. Very mild symptoms in the majority of the case. Could be fever, could be lower blood pressure, and it could be worse like an end organ damage. But most of these side effects are manageable, and it resolves based on the study. 99% of these patients' symptoms resolve less than 2 weeks. The other side effects that we actually can notice about the Carvkti is the neurotoxicity. And that could be very mild, like a headache, some lethargy, or altered status. It could be worse up to seizures or some movement disorder, but it's not very common to see that. And most of these patients, if they have these symptoms while in the hospital, they require us to pay more attention for them, ask neurologists to be consulted. But we have to be very careful, who are these patients and what treatment we need to give it to them. But based on the studies, after 4 days of these symptoms, all of these patients' symptoms has resolved, and that's a great thing about it. The third portion of the side effects that we actually see in these patients is what we call the hematological or the blood toxicity. And it's expected, especially with the stage. You get a lot of treatments, your bone marrow is exhausted, you're not producing enough white blood cells and blood and platelets after giving the CAR T cell, so it takes a little bit longer time for the white counts to recover, about 2 weeks, and the platelets to recover about 4 weeks. However, the majority of the patients' counts recover. A small portion of patients might require some stem cell boost, like Jody actually required that, and that's another reason why we highly recommend that these CAR T cells to be provided in institutions like KU that have a really comprehensive stem cell transplant, so they can actually manage these toxicity and minimize that.
Dr. McGurk, Juan wants to know, are there any indications of vitamin C IV therapy for cancer?
This is an area of great controversy, and I have to express that I'm certainly not an expert, and I don't know that literature very well, so I'll have to let that one go.
That's okay, not a problem. We don't know every single thing. I always say, kind of almost everything.
No.
Yeah, you do. Yes, you do. I have one last question for you. What's the future of CAR T? Take us 10, 20 years down the road in your hopes.
Absolutely. It's an extraordinary future. Already, we're just in the first years of these therapies, and we're seeing incredibly effective signals in patients, as I described, with a number of different types of blood cancers, leukemias, non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, multiple myeloma. And this is just the beginning, and these are the first generation CAR T cell therapy. So there are men and women in laboratories across the world community who are figuring out who it works in, why it works, how long it's going to work, how we can mitigate some of these toxicities that Dr. Abdallah just described, and how to get it to work in other cancers such as solid tumors, metastatic breast cancer, advanced colon cancer, pancreatic cancer, lung cancer. And such studies are already underway, including in our own center, where we're studying CAR T cell therapy in patients with solid tumors in the most advanced setting, like we did originally with the blood cancers. Yes, we're moving it up earlier in therapy in those settings, but first we've got to study it in the worst case scenario solid tumors. And those are much more common diseases than the blood cancers, relatively rare. And I anticipate an extraordinarily promising future in the next decade to two.
The good news is what we're seeing today is a really good indicator. But I mean, it's fast
Absolutely.
moving. You would find this
stunning.
to be fast moving.
It's absolutely stunning.
Well, guys, this is a great conversation today. Learned a lot. Great to have Jody on. Let's get to our final thoughts. And Jody, I'm going to let you go first. Just what do you want us to know?
I just want to say thank you to Dr. Abdallah, Dr. Shanae for getting me into this. Gosh, and I hope so many more people will be able to have this.
Thank you for going first. Dr. Abdallah, the final thoughts.
Well, I agree with what Dr. McGurk has said about the future of the Carvkti, but I want to add one more thing about Carvkti, as Judy actually has mentioned. The importance of Carvkti is not only the efficacy and the less side effects, is one important thing that we keep actually underestimating: quality of life. This is a better quality of life. These patients receive a treatment only one time. They don't have to come to the hospital or the clinic once every other week, or every week. This is a better quality of life for these patients, and that equals more quality of time they actually can spend it with their family, with their loved ones. I think that's really an advantage for this treatment.
Dr. McGurk, final thoughts from you today.
Absolutely. This is the most exciting, promising time in the history of cancer therapeutics. We're seeing extraordinary stories unfold and patient outcomes like Jody's, and so tens of thousands of more people will benefit, and that will just get better and better as the science unfolds.
Thank you both for being here and for leading the way in this treatment and taking care of our patients. We appreciate you both.
Thank you so much.
Dr. Hawkinson, final thoughts on this Monday?
I just want to say, thank you to our guests. It's always a privilege working here with this group and Dr. McGurk and Dr. Abdallah. So just definitely good information, and spread the information around to your friends and family, like we said, who may not have access to it where they are living. So.
Doc Hawk, thanks so much. Well, it was a record-setting night for the University of Kansas Cancer Center. More than $2.3 million was raised during the 20th annual Treads and Threads event. That is the largest amount in the history of this event. Thousands of people turned out to this unique black tie affair, including more than 100 nurses and other medical staff and frontline workers from here at the health system. This year's event was held in the parking lot. It's usually out at the Speedway, but it was in the parking lot between Kauffman and Arrowhead Stadium. So a very cool, unique way to celebrate. In addition to some of the great food and drink, this year's musical guests were country band Alabama. And of course, the night was brought down by Emerald City Band, a big fan favorite. Lots of fun out there. We appreciate everyone who came out and supported. And dozens of people in need of a kidney transplant looking for a donor. They attended the annual Big Ask Big Give this weekend at the health system's Westwood campus. During this event, patients learned how to talk to friends and family about this important give and why social media is a great way to connect with potential donors. They met and talked with our transplant team and others also in need of a life-saving kidney transplant. Finally, this morning, spreading joy and creating smiles for children facing some of their toughest days.
Well, hello. How are you doing?
U.S. Women's National Soccer captain Becky Sauerbrunn stopped by the health system's pediatric unit to visit cancer patients and deliver what's called a joy jar. It's part of a national program called Jesse's Joy Jars, which are for kids actively fighting cancer. Each of the jars is age and gender specific and filled with new toys and glasses and towels and just fun stuff to help these kids smile and feel loved. As you can see, it definitely did the trick. Several nurses also got a chance to hang out and get a photo with Becky herself. Thank you so much for being with us today. Don't forget you can catch our updates anytime by logging onto Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter. Go out, make it a great day, and we'll see you back here tomorrow at 8. Coming up tomorrow on the Morning Medical Update, it looks like a regular car, but it could help make a difference in those undergoing rehabilitation. I'm Jessica Lovell. From getting back into the driver's seat to boarding an airplane, overcoming injury and returning to everyday life can be a challenge. How a program here at the health system is changing all that. Tuesday at 8.
Subscribe to our Morning Medical Update and Open Mics with Dr. Stites podcast. Now, everywhere podcasts are available.